And joining us now, Renato Discenza, who is the CEO of Invest Toronto, and we're happy to welcome you in this studio and into that chair.
Thank you, Steve. I'm delighted.
You are leading the agency, I guess, charged with selling Toronto to the world as a big business destination. And I want to know, how accurate do you think it is to call Toronto a global economic hub today? How accurate is that?
Absolutely accurate, Steve.
A global economic hub.
Global. I mean, in fact, every objective study you look at continually places Toronto high above it, whether it's our economic clout. PwC recently actually had a Cities of Opportunity report where it said Toronto's economic clout is only second to New York and Paris. So I think by other standards, it's definitely up there. Objective data and anecdotal data, we are a global hub.
Okay, but you talk to financial journalists around the world, for example, and they always, of course, talk New York, London, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Paris. They don't say Toronto. And in fact, Henny Sender was on this program a few months ago, and I asked her, and she kind of laughed in my face. So, really, global?
Absolutely. And if you talked to people 3 or 4 years ago, you might have said global Canadian banks, and they probably would have said, well, it's Canadian banks. I think there's a big difference. The world has shifted a bit, and I think the principles of the kind of economy we have here and what we have to offer, I think the world's looking at it much differently, and Toronto's definitely on the map now.
Let's look at some of the numbers. Here is Greater Toronto, not just the 416, but the GTA by the numbers. $269 billion of gross domestic product. That's 20% of Canada's GDP. Toronto's ranked 4th on the Economist's Global Livability Index, Vancouver incidentally coming first. Toronto ranks 8th globally for market size, 120.3 million people within a 500-mile radius. It ranks ahead of all U.S. metropolitan areas on business tax competitiveness, 5th in Canada incidentally. And with more than 44% of its population foreign-born, more than 140 languages are spoken in the GTA. However, Renato, here's the other side of the story. The Toronto Board of Trade also says that this city ranks 11 out of 12 for new venture capital investment, 12 out of 24 for the number of patents per capita, 19 out of 19 on commuting time, behind even Los Angeles. Behind even Los Angeles. So when you look at that list, what screams out at you?
Well, first of all, on the capital, remember, they're talking through their Capital Lens report. They're talking about venture capital. In fact, the Milken report recently actually pointed out that Canada, as a nation for capital access, and also interestingly enough, Australia, were the top 2 capital access market. For example, we're the world's largest stock exchange for minerals and energy. So while venture capital is definitely an area we always want to improve upon, total capital access is there. So we're quite proud of the financial clout that Toronto has.
How much do those last 3 things on the list concern you, though?
Well, they always, look, it's always a concern to have people have mobility, but on the other hand is, when you're such a large and growing population, it's important. Incidentally enough, even today the OECD put out a correction on how some of those traffic measures are studied, whether CMA or not. It doesn't matter. We do have a $50 billion regional transit plan. Movement started on that, and I prefer to look at what we're doing now and how many other jurisdictions in the world have started with 9, 10, 11 billion dollars of transit plans, and we certainly have, and we have great ambitions.
Isn't much of that transit plan in stasis right now because of the last provincial budget?
Absolutely not. In fact, my understanding is right now there are projects that shovels in the ground. The 4 or 5 major projects have already started progress. I think we'd like them to move faster, always, but there's definitely a $8, $9 or $10 billion commitment already in play.
How is Toronto a leader as opposed to a follower when you compare it to other major cities in the G20, all of whom will be represented here?
Well, definitely, and you saw there's some articles talking about Toronto punching above its weight, et cetera. I do think we far impact the world greatly because of our diverse economic, ethnic connections and our people. We like to say when Torontonians come here, they're Torontonians, they're not immigrants. And I think that connection to other parts of the world definitely gives us influence. From a policy perspective, we're one of the major ICT cities in North America, the 3rd largest, information, communications, and technology. We have a huge life sciences, ecotech community. We have world-class academic institutions, so we definitely are influential. For example, next year we're hosting the Indian International Film Festival. 350 million people will be watching this, first time in North America. Where is it? Toronto. So while we have wonderful festivals like TIFF, we also have international acclaim. And so we are attracting people that are looking at Toronto as truly a global city.
Okay, but last night on the program, Alan Alexandrov was here from the Monk School. And one of the things he said was, yes, we have all of these wonderful languages and different cultures represented in the city, but don't make the mistake of translating that into hard sales from here to there. That in fact, there's not necessarily a great relationship between our ability to have people from all around the world here and making business deals all around the world because of it. We're still doing most of our business with the United States. Overwhelmingly most of our business still with the United States. So do you have to be careful when we get up on our soapboxes and say about how useful having people from all over the world is here?
We will, our U.S. is our biggest trading partner, will continue to be our biggest trading partner. When you look at the emerging GDP, however, of all those other countries, we soon see they are growing significantly faster. And with all due respect, it's a strategic advantage for us to have these connections. Most of the entrepreneurial jobs, the small, medium jobs, are being built by business people from all around the world. So the reality is the growth factor is in other nations. And realizing that whether you call them BICs or BRICs, and want to include Russia or not, the reality is the GDP of those emerging economies are well represented here, both with people coming here for new hope, but also bringing their businesses.
Oh, but I bet you haven't got any numbers to prove that, though. I don't think they exist.
In terms of?
In terms of how you can demonstrate to us that having a South Asian population of X number of people in this town results in X number of business deals or X percentage of our GDP because of it. I'm not sure that study exists.
The reality is most of that business is done at small, medium levels. So, but we are in fact, as new companies are looking at us, for example, the Punjab Bank in India, one of the second largest public sector banks, has actually declared this morning that they are locating in Canada. And one of the reasons is because of its rich, diverse population. Seems anecdotal, but it's a real company coming here.
Where in Canada?
It will be all across Canada. And
okay.
ICICI, the Indian National Bank, has located in Canada. We're seeing more and more people paying attention. That kind of interest doesn't come unless you have at least some outreach and some connectivity. So I'd say there's significant evidence that those connections are starting to pay off.
Okay. If your job is to sell Toronto, and you just mentioned the BICs, do I assume that you are looking for most of our new business to come from Brazil, India, China?
And other parts of the world, but definitely Western Europe's important. We've already been through there. We'll definitely be looking at those places. To me, it's more about what kind of companies we're looking to attract here rather than the specific regions. But definitely, whether they be you include Russia or not, in that emerging economies are important. One of the reasons is we have a significant advantage in business transparency. And all over the world, one of the most trusted business environments is Canada. And certainly Toronto's the economic hub becomes important. So people who have developed significant wealth, both personally and corporately, are looking, where do I make that next investment?
No, I get that. We're not Nigeria. There's no doubt about that. But having said that, you can't offer the kinds of incentives that other jurisdictions can. For example, you can't tell businesses they can come here and they'll have a property tax holiday for the next 10 years, come set up here, right? You don't have those kind of inducements to offer. So why should they come here?
Well, it's interesting you mention that. I mean, the reality is the inducements is actual value. The fact that KPMG, for example, who literally wrote the book on tax and cited Toronto, specifically in a number of cities, as one of the best corporate tax indexes in the world, globally, for major cities, located their back office here in Toronto. So the reality is sometimes there's a saying, you know, the uglier the bride, the bigger the dowry. So if the money's going in as a cash up front, the reality is to make up for something else. When we look at businesses and start discussing it, the first priority is you have to have a standalone business case. You will be successful in Toronto as is. The next question is, how can we make you more successful? So the reality is we can never look to subsidize a business. We can look to supplement it, sweeten the deal. So I think there's a lot in the value proposition that on a standalone basis, Toronto, Canada, and Ontario is very competitive.
Let me read something that the Globe and Mail published earlier this month. It said, the Toronto region has long boasted about its role as Canada's diversity hub. But Toronto is doing a worse job of integrating immigrants than it was 2 decades ago, and it's costing the economy estimated billions of dollars a year, according to a report being released Thursday by the city's Board of Trade. The issue goes beyond platitudes about equity and equal opportunity. Toronto Board of Trade President Carol Wilding says Toronto is hurting its economy, its livability, and its competitiveness on the world stage if it can't address growing gaps in its population's welfare. How does this news complicate your efforts to portray this city as a kind of a welcoming, diverse, open, good place to be?
Well, it's the very existence of that report that actually does it, and let me explain. The reality is, this is all relative. We are not doing a good enough job. We have a huge potential, and we are not tapping into it as quickly as we'd like. Now, on an absolute basis, are we doing that better than anywhere else in the world? Absolutely. We continue to attract people from all around the world. recalling, in less than a generation, 2/3 of the people walking Toronto will be visitable minorities. 78% of them will be an immigrant or the son of an immigrant. So definitely we're attracting them in. The very existence that we're actually having a debate and concern about the ability to tap into that potential far outweighs anything else anywhere else in the world is happening. They're not even concerned about that debate. In fact, the biggest question I get when I go overseas is, well, you have all these immigrants, and how's that social integration thing going? You know, we're trying to achieve diversity and inclusivity. It's not perfect, but the fact that we're concerned about it signals a level of concern that far outweighs most other jurisdictions.
How about, you're Invest Toronto, so are you representing the 416 only?
I represent whatever Toronto means to you.
Well, see, now this is what I want to get at here, because there's some people who think you are basically here to try to sell the 416 and lure jobs to the 416. But some people think you ought to be, operating on behalf of the whole Greater Toronto Area, and maybe even points beyond that. So how do you see the mandate?
So, and all those are applicable in the sense that when the only 416-905 issue exists only within 30 kilometers of Toronto. Most of the times you go outside, people probably don't know the difference between Mississauga or Markham. The reality is Toronto is not a geopolitical boundary. It's a concept, it's a place, it's a set of social policies, set of economic interests that are all beyond any political border. And if you think about it, we're the anchor. So the reality is when you say Toronto, it's probably helping people beyond even 416-905.
But your job is not to lure jobs to Mississauga.
My job is to make people look at Toronto as a viable alternative. And when they come here, we absolutely work hand in glove with the economic development agencies. We're a major founder and sponsor of the GTMA, which actually looks pan-Toronto. And in fact, anywhere in Ontario, our goal is let's get them here first. And the client needs to go where the client goes. And the reality is, the way jobs work, if somebody locates on the north side of Steeles, the reality is there's a lot of Torontonians in there as well.
Okay, I hear you, and I don't want to belabor this, but who signed your paycheck?
City of Toronto.
Exactly.
But
So,
the reality
yeah.
is the City of Toronto benefits from any net movement in here. So, for example, absolutely, we're always trying to talk about Toronto, but we don't force an image of Toronto that has anything to do with something called 416. We take them wherever the client needs to be. Toronto, the region, and Ontario benefits from a net inflow of creativity, idea, and capital. So we're never going to stop somebody from coming here, even if it's in Mississauga or Markham.
Okay. Tell me this. We got the biggest countries in the world coming here for the next few days. What does it mean to this city to play host of the G20, given, yes, we love the publicity and the Toronto Dateline on all of the stories that are going to be written, but there's the fence and the fake lake and the security and $1.2 billion on. I mean, weigh it all for me. Net positive or net negative to Toronto?
Bottom line, if you want to be a global city, you have to have a willingness and an ability to host these things, and we've shown and demonstrated both. We're getting people looking at Toronto would have never even thought about it. We were getting inquiries from journalists and businesses that previously didn't understand what Toronto offered. So anytime that we have an opportunity, be it G20, be it the Indian International Film Festival, or any other international set of eyes looking at us, as a sales and marketing guy, that's an awesome opportunity.
Okay, let me follow up on that, because that's really important, because the people who did the Pittsburgh Summit in 2009, the Globe and Mail ran a piece by David Shribman of the newspaper down there saying, you know what, yeah, for 2 days we were the center of the world's attention, and then after that it didn't do us a damn bit of good. There's no, one of his points is there's not a hell of a lot of evidence to suggest that we got all this fabulous new investment, new companies setting up there because we held a summit for 2 days. Are you more convinced than that, and if so, why, that this has legs holding the summit here?
I don't think any one particular international event has legs. The fact that now you have a host set of new people looking at us, absolutely. It's about lead generation. The reality is most companies, for example, there's 7 out of 10 companies won't even talk to a city or an economic development agency until they've shortlisted that city. So imagine, unless you have a brand recognition, you're not even going to get a chance to pitch. So the fact that more companies and more countries are now familiar with us, have heard about us, and you talk to the people in Vancouver after hosting the Olympics, there's a lot of buzz out there. And whether it's tomorrow or the next day, the reality is anytime people know you and understand a little bit more about you, it absolutely works. Yeah, and it's not a one-time event.
Renato, the Olympics was a 2.5-week feel-good story or 3-week feel-good story, and this is a 2-day, some people think, boondoggle,
Well,
Can't compare them.
Again, if you're telling me that an opportunity to get Toronto's name out in front of billions of people is not an opportunity for Invest Toronto Showcase, then you have to tell me what the other avenues are.
I am not saying that at all.
Yeah.
Let me ask you in our last 30 seconds, just a bit of an odd question, but your predecessor was in that chair a year ago, Michael Bryant, and obviously because of the accident he had that caused somebody's death, he left the job. Do you ever find it odd that you got this job through a very odd and curious set of circumstances?
We're unfortunate circumstances for sure. However, I'm very excited to be actually leading Invest Toronto. To me, it's a unique value proposition. As an immigrant coming to this city, to be able to sell the city that I still see as the ultimate city of hope anywhere else in the world, for your business, for yourself, I think it's a true honor and pleasure. So I'm excited to be here any which way I can get here.
You are a good salesman, I'll give you that.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Renato Discenza, good of you to come into TVO tonight and visit us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.